of our working group. So this is a working group on connectivity and conflicts, which is kind of stamped, labeled by AEGES, which is kind of the French Association for War and Strategic Studies. So it's a strong and useful support for us. So to work on this issue, connectivity and conflict. So the idea is to have this kind of webinar to share ideas, to learn a lot from you guys, and then also to test hypotheses, to share findings, maybe to give ideas to people who are working on similar topic but different areas, so kind of comparison. And and also in the shorter term, the idea is also to record and maybe to do a kind of podcast, video on YouTube. So for people later to listen to our webinar. So this will be for 1 hour. All the usual disclaimer vis-a-vis our institution, the association. Of course, this is only our ideas which are going to be shared today. And so we will go for 3 presentations, about 15 minutes each, and then later kind of 10 minutes for Q&A session. So for everybody, if you have any question, feel free to click on a Q&A and to type your question, and then later we can, for the last quarter, we can have a Q&A session to ask the question to our panelists. I think that's it. And so, Aris, over to you. So to introduce our panelists today and the topic, maybe. I think you are muted. You can unmute.
Sorry. So let me introduce, thank you, Éric. Let me introduce our speakers. Our first speaker will be Dr. Swasti Rao. Dr. Rao, you are geopolitics and defense expert, associate professor and associate dean at the Jindal School for International Affairs in India, defense advisor to India's Ministry of Defense, and consulting editor to The Print, which is a media. By the way, a few weeks ago, you wrote a very interesting piece on the need to connect the IMEC to the Swiss initiative. So I really recommend it, and it's highly relevant to today's discussion. Our second speaker will be Dr. Lauren Dagan Amos. Welcome. Dr. Amos, you are a research fellow at the BESA, the Begin-Sadat Center for Strategic Studies, and faculty member at the Bar-Ilan University in Tel Aviv, Israel. And you are also senior research fellow at the Center for New Age Warfare Studies in India. You also wrote a piece I noticed personally in past April on the deepening ties between Israel and India, which was really interesting and I think equally relevant to today's discussion. So thank you. And our third speaker is Dr. Mihai Sebe. Nice to have you with us. You are lecturer at the University of Bucharest, Romania, and Interinstitutional Relations Coordinator at the European Institute Romania. By the way, both Swasti and I also participated to your report of your institute with great pleasure a few weeks ago. Let me present also ourselves, I mean the moderators. Éric, you are a visiting fellow at ASPI, the Australian Strategic Policy Institute in Canberra, and adjunct fellow at 2 institutions based in Paris, the Research Institute on Contemporary Southeast Asia, the IRASEC, and the Strategic Research Institute of the French Military Academy, the IRSEM. As for me, I am researcher at the Department of Political Science of the University of Salerno in Italy, and associate researcher at the Mediterranean Foundation for Strategic Studies, the FMES. By the way, both Éric and I also served many years ago as teachers at the French Naval Academy. Let me continue by setting the scene for today's discussion. In fact, we had planned initially to make our series of webinar in next fall. However, let's say that the Gulf crisis prompted us to move a bit quicker. So today we will try to unpack how the IMEC and the Swiss initiative are being impacted by the Gulf crisis. In fact, if we have a closer look to the Swiss initiative, there is a clear geopolitical dimension driving it. To make it very short, because I think Mihai will develop on this, the final objective we can say is to somehow replace the traditional connectivity, east-west connectivity between Western Europe and Russia by a north-south connectivity between the Baltic Sea and the Mediterranean. Yet this makes sense only if the Mediterranean is safely and efficiently connected to the Indo-Pacific. And here comes the issue of the IMEC and, of course, the challenges that are posed by the current turmoil in the Middle East. So today we really will focus on two excellent case studies of connectivity initiatives and how they are being shaped or shaken by ongoing conflicts. The last thing I wanted to mention regarding the Gulf crisis is that it reminds us two important things, I think. The first is that in any transitional period from a regional or global order to another, any economic or trade project and initiative inevitably becomes a geopolitical and security issue. This is the first thing. And the second thing, I think that on the regional order that will come out of this instability in the Middle East will highly depend the terms of the connection between Europe and the Indo-Pacific for the many decades ahead. So from this point of view, I think it's legitimate to say that we are going through a critical period. So I stop here and I immediately leave the floor to Dr. Rao for 15 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I hope I'm audible and visible to everybody. And apologies for the initial glitches, and thanks for helping me out with it. It's really it's a privilege and it's an honor because Aris, I mean, and also Mihai, we've been trying to sort of put together something like this, and we've been trying to find like-minded people who are working on things like this for a while now. And I think this is a fruit of very hard labor. So I think we should all be very proud of it. And I hope it's just the beginning of a long series of such interactions to follow. Also very happy to see you, Laura. And let me now begin. So in the 10 minutes that have been given to me, I have been asked to talk about the new connectivity architecture in India, Middle East, and Europe, which is after the Gulf crisis. And that is where it becomes interesting because naturally after the Gulf crisis, of course, the Gulf region is not going back to the status quo ante at all. Now, while it doesn't change much for India, Europe, because India, Europe are on a path of deeper economic collaboration with an FTA now being finalized, more tech collaboration, more people-to-people ties. So while the European leg of IMEC per se is something that we have been working on for a while now, but it is the Middle Eastern leg of IMEC, which obviously is going to be looking very different because I totally agree with the point that there is no going back to status quo ante. So for today's presentation, what I've done is that I know that there are also distinguished panelists and colleagues. Laura is going to be talking more about, the Israeli part, the Middle Eastern part, and perhaps, I can see that Mihai is going to be talking more about the 3Cs. So let me just try to be the bridge between, the two and give you some details. This is how IMEC actually looked when it was envisioned in the G20 summit in India. And this G20 summit happened in September 2023. It was just a few weeks before the Hamas attack happened on Israel in October 2023. And if you carefully see, basically, ever since this has been, of course, a problematic region, but even before and when the IMEC was envisioned and when it was announced during India's G20 presidency, it was actually announced with a lot of fanfare, but it was always something which was a great vision, but very difficult to be operationalized. And there were several reasons for it because everybody thought it was a logistics nightmare. One did not know how, the sea corridor is going to then translate into a land corridor and how the different legal scenarios and the different legal systems of different countries is going to be streamlined enough so that something like this could take off. And I think as a result, several countries that were on board were quite convinced with the logic it put forward, but started appointing their special envoys to really iron out these differences. Now, that is how it was happening. Even now, I think if you look diplomatically from India's perspective, there is a lot of push for IMEC. It builds into our larger search for resilience, for diversification, because as you know that India is still very dependent on the Suez Canal route. And then IMEC was one of the two routes that we were discussing alternatively. One was, of course, the international north-south trade corridor, which was spanning across Iran, then the Caucasus and into Russia, which again is in a lot of trouble because of what is happening with Iran, and also because Russia and Iran both remain sanctioned countries. And the other was, of course, IMEC. So just going forward, this is how it basically looked. And the key point here is that even then, when it had just come up, the vision was always appreciated, but the operational part was always considered a problem. And everybody was trying to talk about how to iron them out. And even then, this is 2023, 2024, the argument that I was making with some of my Polish colleagues was that we should not be too fixated with developing the IMEC in toto, because it is absolutely fine for the Middle Eastern leg to take its own time, while the India-Europe leg can be developed. And that was always the point. And that was also one of the reasons why there was a lot of research done later on how basically Piraeus may not really be a great option. And I'm going to be talking a little bit more about that. Now, this is just to quickly tell you that the first analytics that I'd like to tell here, and this is just a map for reference, but the point that I want to basically talk about here is that I think through my writings, I have underscored the need to distinguish IMEC as the original IMEC from what I call the IMEC 2.0, where I have argued that IMEC 1.0 was basically a straight line, and the second, which is the IMEC 2.0, is going to be developing as a lattice of networks to build redundancy and resilience that kind of support each other. And I think it's very, very clear that the current Iran war has laid bare a fundamental reality. 20% of global energy trade, etc., cannot afford to rely on a single artery, and no matter how resilient and cost effective it was. So, of course, now it is very clear that we are going to be working towards a network of interconnected routes, pipelines, ports, and logistics hubs. In short, what I call the IMEC 2.0. And if I look at the contours of what is happening in the region, and I'll be quick here because I know that Laura perhaps could be speaking about the same thing, but just to sort of tell you how this analytics of IMEC 2.0 as a lattice versus the line which was earlier has come about. I do see that if you look at the Saudi Arabia, map here, I mean, it's for here to see. If you see here, you can see that there's an east-west pipeline which is now pumping its optimal on its at its optimal capacity. Similarly, if you see here, it is the Fujairah pipeline for the UAE. Basically, this is all to sort of bypass the Strait of Hormuz, as it's very clear. And also, if you go ahead, you see that it doesn't really stop there, but it is also, looking at Iraq, which was very much dependent on the Hormuz and doesn't really have a kind of a sea around it. You see that Iraq is now doubling down on the Kirkuk-Ceyhan pipeline that you see on the map here, and you also see an alternative one which is going, the Syrian port of Bania. So, in short, what you see is that Jordan and Syria and their emergence as important transshipment, hubs. These kind of things are going to, we will see more and more development in these respects. Also, what connects these things that for a lot of, infrastructure development in Jordan and Syria, as I see that Emiratis are a major investor there. And from India's perspective, of course, United Arab Emirates and Israel are two most important partners for us in the region. So naturally, then I argue that, it makes sense India to co-develop stakes where we see the Emirati or the Israeli factor. And just next to you is a map here that basically shows the other pipeline that goes from Eilat to Ashkelon. And I would leave it to Laura to sort of talk more about it. But I think it just underscores the whole point that even this, especially after the normalization of the Abraham Accords, you see that this is an Israel and Emirati sort of joint project. And as again, basically fits into the larger logic of what are the contours of the lattice that we see emerging. And this was just to give you a brief snapshot, because I want to talk about the European leg more. And I think this is something that is going to be different. Now, very quickly, when I come to the second part, and this is the second part on which I think there has been research happening any which way, because like I mentioned, that even though in its original form, the Middle Eastern leg was never very clear in terms of how it is going to happen, but the India-Europe leg was very, very clear. If you look at the India, and just before I come to this particular map, I just like to give you some figures. So, as I mentioned, that India and Europe is finalizing the world's largest FTA, and the total trade between our two sides has already crossed $200 billion. And even if you look at the FTA, and it talks about how 99% of goods in India will get more access to Europe, etc., I think it basically underscores the main point, which is that the trade, no matter which way you look at it, trade plus services, but of course here we're talking more of trade in merchandise, that is going to grow. And in bilateral trade in goods, as of today, stands at about $136.54 billion, with Indian exports touted at $76 billion. So it underscores two things. One is that it's very robust and it is definitely going to grow. And second, that this is a trade which is in India's export surplus. Now, India as an economy suffers from a large overall, when you look at our balance of export and imports, we suffer from an export deficit. And therefore, the partners with whom we have a certain export surplus fit very, very, importantly into India's economic and connectivity aspirations. And that is something I wanted to underscore, because it's not just a trade figure, it's also that we enjoy the export surplus. Now, very quickly, all these figures are from the Indian Press Information Bureau releases, so they are as official as it can get. Now, very quickly, I think the PIB releases have also been underscoring the fact that India and Europe, trade, of course, is much below its potential, etc. And this is what, IMEC 2.0 should be looking at. So I think I'm just basically talking about what is already a big part of the connectivity discourse in India. Now, quickly, if you look at India from the Indian perspective, these are the four ports here that I've mentioned. The Jawaharlal Nehru Port in Maharashtra, as you can see here, the Jawaharlal Nehru Port, the Deen Dayal Port in Gujarat, the Deen Dayal Port in Gujarat, the state of Gujarat, because from India's perspective, this is the western side of India, where Middle East and eventually Europe lie. This is a part, of course, which is looking after the other side of India, which is look east and act east policy. However, then there is a Mundra Port again in Gujarat, and there's a Chidambaram Port in here in Tamil Nadu. Most of the exports that India does to Europe actually go via these four ports. This particular map shows you how many ports we have, and therefore we have capacity to develop, more port infrastructure. But as of now, as of 2026, these are the four ports via which most of our exports to Europe go. Going further, when I look at Europe, most of the cargo that leaves the Indian ports, that the four ports that I mentioned in my earlier map, actually reach Rotterdam, Hamburg, and Antwerp. And if you look at the capacities, of course, Rotterdam is known to be the one of the largest port having ports with having the largest shipment and transshipment and cargo handling capacities in the entire world. So Rotterdam is no surprise, of course, Hamburg and Antwerp. And if I've just given you a little bit of a figure here, which says that these countries somewhere are also India's biggest trading partners, Germany, Netherlands, and France and Italy. Now, the point that I wish to underscore here is that, of course, you can see these are where the ports are. The point that I wish to underscore here is that, looking at it from India's perspective, what happens is, and this is something that I found useful, because even if you were to sort of ignore this part of the Middle Eastern, leg of IMEC, which obviously is going to undergo a different kind of a trajectory after what has happened in the Gulf, and I already alluded to it. If you look at the European part, what you see from India's perspective in the last few years is that India, the original idea of IMEC was to connect to only Piraeus. But now there has been, in the last 2 years, after 2023, so in 24 and in 25, you see that there has been a lot of discussion and discourse on how to develop more connectivity with Marseille. So, for example, you come from India here in Mumbai, and in Mumbai-Marseille connectivity, the Mumbai-Trieste connectivity, and then researchers like myself have argued that you also have to look beyond Piraeus, because Piraeus is something which is completely dominated by China. So why not look at Thessaloniki or Volos? And then the argument, I'll tell you why. Now, if you look at the shipping capacity, of course, I told you the Rotterdam, Hamburg, and Antwerp shipping capacities were quite massive. Compared to that, of course, as you can see, Marseille is at 2.5 million TEU, values. Trieste is 1.3, Piraeus is 7.5, huge, but again, very, very dominated by China. And then comes Thessaloniki and Volos. Now, the point that I wish to drive home here, a couple of things, and with which I will end because I think I have already taken my time. The thing that I wish to underscore here is that while there is a discourse in India on developing the Mumbai-Marseille connectivity, but it does not really help expand India's trade outreach and footprint in the European hinterland, because Marseille then is not really connected that well to the European hinterland. By comparison, Trieste, which has a relatively smaller capacity, is much better connected. And therefore, from India's perspective, we see a lot of discussion now to also develop a parallel connectivity and strategic entry points in Trieste. Piraeus, of course, is already envisioned in the original IMEC idea. I argue against it, and I would rather pitch for Thessaloniki or Volos. The reason being the same. So from India's perspective, when we look at developing more strategic gateways into Europe, because all metrics show that this trade is only going to grow, the point to underscore is that we have to be doubling down on regions where geopolitically speaking, the China's 17+1 mechanism has not been working very well, and the countries of the region are themselves looking for more dependable diversification partners. And I'm sure Mihai is going to be talking a lot about that because he's going to be presenting on 3Cs. So that is the first point. From India's perspective, this is not just economic security and economic aspiration, but also about, pitching itself as a diversification partner to China. And second, and Aris alluded to the fact that from India's perspective, just as the Indo-Pacific region has been a very important geopolitical construct, so is Indo-Mediterranean now. And of late, as India's Indo-Mediterranean footprint and engagement deepens, I think this only fits into the larger logic of how India can sort of, put that meat on the bones by way of utilizing the untapped economic potential. So this is, of course, the 3Cs. This is just a rough map of, showing that there is something that exists within Europe where India should definitely be interested in developing more, stakes. And it only makes sense for India, a country like India that already has its exports routed through the 3 main ports, to develop alternate strategic, entry points, because these are the regions which are where the trade potential is still untapped. I told you that none of these countries from this region, apart from Italy, actually, is one of the largest trading partners for India. So these are regions where there is true trade potential and something that has been recognized again and again. And just one more thing that sometimes gets missed when we are talking about Indo-Pacific and Indo-Mediterranean, and why this convergence is not just something that the Indian policymakers talk about, but a lot of other Indo-Pacific players also talk about, is the fact that a country like Japan, which is a very important Indo-Pacific partner for us, is already a partner at the 3Cs initiative. So the geopolitical, the geoeconomic logic cannot be overstated. The point is how to get it done. And to my mind, I think the best way to look at it is to sort of look at the Middle Eastern leg of IMEC a little bit separately, because the timing, unfortunately, is not right for it. It's just that they have a push for it now that did not exist earlier. So now you can sort of, pitch that argument in a larger logic of economic security. As for India and Europe, I think that there can never be a better time for India, to push India to have more strategic gateways. And just my last point, Aris, with your permission, is that I've also been noticing, in India, we've also been noticing how suddenly the Western Balkans and many of the Western Balkan countries are also part of the 3Cs. They have emerged as very important, even from the United States perspective of long-term energy security. So from India's perspective, there is just a discourse which is now starting in a very, I would say, rudimentary fashion, because of course the European leg is something which we are definitely more familiar with. But when it comes to the American leg, I think there is a discourse which is starting on, can then India have a kind of a parallel, double engagement strategy that engages the European actors as well as American actors? I will not jump the gun and talk too much about America, because I know that there even the American and the European interests are clashing. So this is something which has just emerged, but I would, I have to mention that we do talk about it a lot. But as far as the European part is concerned, for discussing what we are discussing. So back to you, Aris, and I look forward to questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Very informative especially for me. I don't know so much about all this region. Lorraine, if it's okay, if you have, I think you have a presentation to share, and Sam, ideally for 15.
So I'm trying to share, just a minute, okay? Can you see my presentation?
Yeah.
So, shalom, namaste. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Rao. It's such a privilege talking after you. I hope that I will reach all your expectations from me. So today I want to talk to you behind the rumors, behind the checkpoint that has come to symbolize our collective vulnerability, and ask larger questions. What does IMEC tell us about the strategic future of connectivity in West Asia? When we look at what was been unfolding in the Middle East and West Asia over the past 2 years, the concept that keeps surfacing is in every analysis instability in the scholarly literature on the strategy and national strategy. We tend to describe a reality like as an environment defined by volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. Since the region descends into an interpreted multi-arena escalation, one that includes the wide-scale military confrontations, a direct war between Israel and Iran and US, and the relentless threats of freedom navigation. We have heard quite a few imperative voices of the international community. Many communicators and analyzers have been quick to declare that the IMEC coordinator, that the ambitions economic coordinator, meant to concept India and Middle East and Europe, Israel, UAE, and announced, of course, in the G20. And I know Dr. Rao said it before, but it's really important to me to emphasize that 3 weeks after that, October 7 happened, and we now know that Sinwar really see the new Middle East and really afraid that Israel and Saudi Arabia will normalization the relationship. So and that is now been buried under the rubble of warfare reality. Today, I want to offer you a completely opposite reading, and I will argue that the far more clear-eyed one. That my thesis is that I want, therefore, is the current crisis not IMEC's gravitators. It is, in effect, the single greatest conceptual catalyst. This regional upheaval is precisely what is now forcing straight blocks and greater powers in gaps of historic significance, the overland corridor trend, and the crucial need to strategic redundancy. Anyone who measures IMEC through a purely technical lens, anyone who asks only will the train run tomorrow morning, so it's missing the deeper questions, the deeper point that connectivity is the 21st century. It's first and foremost a question of national security and a new global architecture. As researchers, our job is not only dazzled by grand visions, but to analyze the facts on what ground as they precisely are. So let me begin right here with the complex challenges that crisis has brought to the surface. To bring some order to this, we can divide this obstacle into three distinct layers: the physical layer, the political layer, and the internal sub-regional layer. The first layer is the physical kinetic vulnerability of the key assets along the route. IMEC built as a chain of sensitive maritime overland endpoints, and the current war has thrown the physical risk into sharp relief Israeli seaports. For the post point, the port of Haifa, which is meant to serve as a Mediterranean gateway to Europe are connecting with the rocket and drone threats. At the same time, Iran reported threats of disparate traffic through the Strait of Hormuz, the central access route connected to India and the Gulf ports, driven by maritime instruments, pressions, and push international invasions into a very cautious wait-and-see posture. The second layer is the barrier diplomatic normalization and the pressure of the Arab Street for the logistic visions of continuous corridor to the materialize. Goods have moved freely from the United Arab Emirates directly into Jordan and then to Israel, but the multi-arena war and the crisis of Gaza have brought that dynamic to a complete health. Rida has made it clear in the most formal obligation term that normalization with Israel will not happen without a genuine, irreversible political horizon for establishment of a Palestine state. And given the suffering public anger, excess, and Arab Street, Gulf leaders simply cannot afford to showcase joint visible projects within Israel at that moment. In the third layer, and to my mind, the most analytically fascinating in the deepest of the three, is the lack of the internal chosen within the Gulf bloc itself. We can often fall into the graph generating trading in the Gulf states as a single monolithically entity, but that is a research error. IMEC offers inside an arena quite rivalry over economy and economacy, centrally between Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates. While the Emirates pushing forward, it even signed February 2024, the first formal agreement with India in connect their ports. And we saw the last visit of Modi's 3 weeks ago, the much deeper, now the dependent relationship between India and UAE. Saudi Arabia making a dramatic geopolitical counter move of its economic and security ties with Pakistan, India's bitter rival, the talks between Riyadh and Islamabad over defense pact and infrastructure investment generate direct tension with New Delhi, and they further strain an already tense relationship between Saudi Arabia and the Emirates. The research question is that emerge is almost self-evident. How can you manage a unified, stable, long-term corridor which, when its two central states are locked into zero-sum game in the back-end opposing goals of South Asia? And to all of this, we have to add a direct great power competition against China Belt and Road Initiative, against the Russian-Iranian NSTC corridor, and against the active opposition of Turkey, which states openly there is no corridor without us. But this, ladies and gentlemen, is exactly where the greatest geopolitical reveals take place. It is previously out of this perfect storm that depicts understanding the IMEC history necessary. And the reason is this: the current crisis has proved sharp empirical proof of the extreme vulnerability of the old globalization model and its sufferers concept that those us in academia and in security establishment must new fully embrace strategic red humanity. Over the past few years, we have watched single-armed military in Yemen and Houthis use cheap drones and missiles and threaten the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, disrupt a close 15% of the global maritime trade, and for sure shipping companies around Africa. And the tension grew sharper still when Iran demonstrated its capability directly threaten traffic through the Strait of Hormuz. So what did the great trending powers, India and United States and European Union, learn from this? They learned that cannot pull all your economic eggs in one single maritime basket, relying exclusively on availability, waterways in mercy, substance actors, and vulnerability checkpoints. It's simply too dangerous to bet. As a result of trend through multimodal corridors, those that combine sea routes with sea lanes can offer a better alternative. And decision makers understood that IMEC is far more than route that move in containers. The global crisis in energy and cyber has made it clear that the project is first foremost disrupt digital and energy corridor. It's designed to include network of underground fallible optic cables, protect from undersea substage, along with the pipelines carrying clean electricity and green hydrogen from the Gulf directly into the heart of Europe in the era where infrastructure itself became a weapon in modern conflict. The physical decentralization and digital protection, the corridor offers give it a strategic advantage that has no real sub-routes. There is another strategic point we are identified in our current research, and it has to do with the resilience, what I called a functional relationship and traditional. International relationship theory and standard assumption is that connectivity and infrastructure are the product of political peace. In other words, first you sign international symmetrical peace treaty, and only then you can build a shared railway. But today, West Asia teaching us the opposite. And for more interesting lesson, functional normalization can peace ahead and can even generate political normalization. Despite the fierce fighting and despite the harsh public rhetoric, the infrastructure work and the diplomacy behind the scenes never fully stopped. India and the Emiratis continue to depend on mutual agreements and integrate the security system of their ports. The European Union signed a dramatic free trade agreements with India and Israel deepen the relationship. The key states like France and Italy continue to maintain a special envoys dedicated solidly to advancing this project. Why do these states insist to continue to invest in the venture of the middle bloody crisis? Because they understand the resilient supply chains are supreme interest and they cannot wait to the political recognition. The unsurprising economic imperative demands tactical coordination, shared cyber defense, and regulatory elements. And that day-by-day coordination builds habits cooperation. It forces the players to manage their disagreements to channels that bypass the points of tension. Behind of that, within leading research institutes in India and within the Council of the Middle East narrative is now developed the sees IMEC as a central mechanism for regional and stabilization in the day after the war. Instead of returning the old modest temporary humanitarian aid that changed nothing to the ground embedding regional projects, whenever it's restrictions of the Gaza Strip or the integration with the Palestine into water and green energy ventures. Inside the border agriculture of IMEC could create unprecedented economic and political initiative. What IMEC offer is in effect is to replace ideological power games with a new regional operational system, one grounded of engineering, international trade, and economic pragmatism. So to summarize, when we analyze the future of India, Middle East, Europe corridor is an era of profound unappeal of conclusion as to do both nonsense and clear-eyed. There is no doubt the war is West Asia and the official diplomatic freeze and the internal tensions between Saudi Arabia and Emiratis around the Pakistani axis have created a real slow down the ground. They have pushed back the timelines of raised level of concern in the private sector. That is a realistic situation demands. We should not downplay its weight, but viewed through a long-term strategic ties, this crisis is the most important wake-up call the corridor could have received. The current violent round has completely shattered the illusion that we can go relying on the oldest traditional multilateralism, expose waterways, improving to all patterns of division. From New Delhi to Riyadh and Abu Dhabi, all the way to Haifa and Italy and France, that they just display need to another, and that treaty must build resilience overland alternative. This is why I affirmed our conversation as a journey behind Hormuz. The global trend through economic corridors is not weakness because of the crisis, it's planning reviewed force from it. Multinational connectivity, strategic redundancy, and industrial overland trade are no longer economic privilege reserved from times of peace and prophecy. They have become new pillars of diplomacy, national strategy, and diplomacy against and security, and the strategic future of connectivity in West Asia is behind. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Lorraine. Thanks a lot. So stimulating. And again, we are very grateful. And we know the privilege to get your views for this seminar, all of you. And Mihai, if it's okay on your side, if you are free, available, or if it's okay, so maybe we can move to your presentation. Over to you. Thanks.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Very well.
Great. So first of all, thank you very much for inviting me here. The presentation before me have been so overwhelming that I think I only have minor things to add, but I'll try to fill in what I believe to be the gaps. Well, talking about the Black Sea, I think that we are the late kids to the party in a way when discussing about connectivity and security, because unfortunately, even after joining European Union, NATO, the question of the Black Sea was more or less sidelined from the big debate. Everyone focused on the oceans, on the Mediterranean, on the Baltics, yet the Black Sea seems to have been the Cinderella from that perspective. Yet, just like any other, let's say, rather Grimm's fairy tale, the Black Sea entered into the arena in the last years due to the ongoing war. So how can we fit to this narrative? First and foremost, after 2004, 2007, we believed partially in the region of the Black Sea and Central and Eastern Europe that we were more or less assisting to some sort of end of history from the point of view that for the first time, we are both securely anchored in the EU and NATO. Yet, even though this was the apex of development at the time, we realized that we are dealing with new and emerging problems. And the fact was due to our history. If you look at the map, we can see that during the communist time, all the roads went from east to west or west to east and follow mostly the gas links. And from that perspective, the north-south axis was underdeveloped. In fact, we were living under the legacy of Soviet Union domination, with structurally undeveloped and fragmented north-south transit and energy grids. And the initial mandate of the Three Seas Initiative, as you all may know, was to catch up with the economic underdevelopment. In fact, the initial mandate was a purely commercial one, was focused at market convergence, bridging the east-west divide and stimulating the regional GDP growth. While after 2022, we realized that economy was not enough and that we need to have also the security economy nexus. And the fact that nowadays energy is also linked with hard security. And from that perspective, we are now in an area where things need to advance further and to create more issues from the point of view of, I don't know, pipelines, rail standardization, digital networks. And from that perspective, we started to advance from the initial phases of conceptual maturity in the Three Seas Initiative to the question of societal resilience after 2022, with a focus on project and commercially driven initiatives, and then starting with Bucharest and Vilnius summits toward strategic expansion, with Greece becoming the 13th member, with Ukraine and Republic of Moldova being more or less associated and partner state on that, and with the strategic partners. And now we are going toward a strategic alignment, especially from the point of view of infrastructure. And from that perspective, We are, and I like to say to every time when I speak with colleagues from abroad, the Black Sea and the Central and Eastern Europe is in a way the most promising region from the point of view of economic development in the future, given the fact that we started from a low point and then we had to advance further. So the catch-up process in itself brings a lot of opportunities despite the question of security that looms in the region. And from that perspective, we are living in a security trilemma in the region from the point of view of connectivity. On the first, we are more or less bare, but the Montreux Convention. In fact, the Montreux Convention from the interwar period has in a way sealed the Black Sea from outside influences and also forced us to rely on ourselves. So building up sovereignty in order to be able to defend the territorial waters and the offshore energy asset is a must. Then it's also about trying to open viable commercial routes across the Black Sea and from the Black Sea to the Mediterranean. And one important element where the international shipping lanes for grain and energy export that are a success in that point of view. And last but not least, it's also trying to avoid, if possible, the escalation in the region. The Black Sea has become renowned in the world because, in a way, we have been vindicated saying that the Black Sea matters. In fact, after the start of the war against Ukraine, the Black Sea became an important element on all the geopolitical maps. And from that perspective, it was also present in various institutional documents across Europe and the transatlantic world. We have then the project of the United States strategy for the Black Sea, the famous Black Sea Security Act. We have the European approach with the strategic approach of the Black Sea, and also the use of intensive formats such as the B9 format for bringing up security. However, each and one of these initiatives, they are dealing with a problem. We have a problem of the fact that they are underfunded, they are understaffed, and most of them tend to become more or less only just nice words on paper. And from that perspective, for instance, the naval presence is constrained by the Montreux Convention limits. The EU approach lacks dedicated budgetary lines and relies wholly on voluntary synchronization. And sometimes regional cooperation has not been the strong point in the region. So we need to overcome the institutional gaps that exist nowadays between Romania, Bulgaria from the point of view of the EU, or from Romania, Bulgaria, and Turkey from the point of view of NATO cooperation. Also, that means that Romania has become, in that context of the Three Seas Initiative and the wider Black Sea area, in the same time, it became a shield and a bridge. Basically, we are called up to defend our territorial waters and the economic exclusive zone, and given the fact that next year we're going to have Neptune Deep project being fully operational. And also we are trying to become more or less a bridge from EU to Central Asia across the Black Sea. And for that, we need to develop, first of all, the historical bottlenecks, meaning the fact that we have slow freight speeds, slow infrastructure, and slow railways. We need to finally catch up with the infrastructure projects starting the Three Seas Initiative. And I mentioned here especially the Rail to Sea and Via Carpathia. And last but not least, we need to bring in Republic of Moldova into the wider connectivity broad. And from that perspective, Romania just recently acquired the only port of Republic of Moldova, the port of Giurgiu, and we try to connect it with our Danubian and Black Sea transportation routes, while also developing road infrastructure directly to Republic of Moldova, and also trying to connect with Republic of Moldova from the energy point of view. So from that perspective, things are to be done. Energy is also the key linchpin from the point of view of the Three Seas Initiative and the wider Black Sea. And from other than the Neptune Deep project in the Black Sea that I already mentioned before. We also need to develop, and this is something that we discuss even today, the nuclear energy in the Three Seas Initiative and the wider Black Sea area. We are starting, just like in the question of infrastructure, from a Soviet era design with serious dependencies from the point of view of supply, with fuel and so on, with Russian Federation due to the communist heritage. With the exception of Romania, who in the 70s decided to use Canadian technology. And in that perspective, the small modular reactor technology is something that is being hotly debated, not only in the region, but also in Bucharest, as we want to be the pioneers of this technology in the region. But the others also, we are dealing with strong economic issues, and that makes a project to be partially put into doubt due to the economic austerity. So the key thing is to decide whether we are, and we decide that nuclear is a strategic issue in the region, where, and if it is strategic and it brings the US in the region, then we should invest no matter the economic output, or if we are to let economic consideration decide and try to find other options. Also, it's about connectivity with the non-EU and non-NATO member states. And the Three Seas Initiative, it's also about reaching east toward Ukraine and Republic of Moldova, and it is also about building up interoperability across the region. And from that perspective, the Black Sea is seen as a connector. We either about the energy projects, that the famous underwater energy cable that goes from Romania to Georgia, or the idea of connecting Central Asia across the Black Sea through or the Port of Constanța with Central and Eastern Europe, it matters, as well as the possibility of having up connectivity going from Greece to Bulgaria and Romania, and then spill over to Central and Eastern Europe and also to Ukraine and Moldova, in both transportation and also energy project like the vertical gas corridor. And from that perspective, things are rather optimistic, I would say, because we have developed finally back home the strategic realization that connectivity matters, and it's not about just a temporary political desire of this or this actor. It's about the interest of both national and the region as a whole. And from that perspective, this integrated blueprint that the Three Seas Initiative have provided to the region, the energy infrastructure, the transport corridors, and also with B9, the idea of building perimeter security and defense networks, is something that can no longer be separated. The pipelines, the high-speed rail lines and highways, or the air defense and so on, are no longer separated domains, but they are interlocking and are becoming part of a single Euro-Atlantic architecture. And Euro-Atlantic is the key because in Bucharest, at least, we do not perceive our security being separated from the United States. In fact, if the EU is a guarantor of economic prosperity, the US is still seen as a key element from security, as well as other projects keep the US in the region. What can we do more? First of all, this is a discussion and the strategic recommendation done by some colleagues in the region, which is still debated here, about coming up with a formalized architecture of connectivity in the region. And this means building up an institutionalization of the Three Seas Initiative. Ad hoc diplomacy worked and still works these days, but there is still the need to give up a shape, to give up a face to the Three Seas Initiative and to the relevant project. And how to do that? One of the ideas was to have a permanent secretariat or a high representative across the region that may represent the face. And it is also this institutionalization to come up with responsibility and transparency. And by responsibility and transparency, I mean having a clear overview of the project across the region, knowing exactly what are the bottlenecks in each of the participating states, both at financial, administrative, or regional level, and having the ability to go and accelerate and eliminate any frictions between participating states from that perspective. So if we want to build up a infrastructure, we should be able to do it in a coherent way from north to south without internal administrative bottlenecks. And it is also about security. Speaking of, and this comes from a country that in the last weeks has seen an intensified drone incidents. And this brings into consideration the need to step up the game and to have the necessary security infrastructure in place for defensive purposes. It's about building an integrated network that can detect in a timely manner any emerging threats. And it is also, last but not least, about funding and about reshaping logistics. We are currently negotiating the next EU budget. From that perspective, we may think about the ability, perhaps, to fund through this MFF instrument the Constanța Maritime Security Hub mentioned in the EU strategic approach. Building up resources at the EU level that will support on the medium and long term this project is essential. And it is also about finding resources to build up the corridors that go from the Black Sea to the Caspian and Central Asia. Last but not least, it's about completing, finally, the Rail to Sea and the Via Carpathia by 2029-2030. It's about elevating the transport infrastructure from just economic priority to urgent national priority, and to minimize, for instance, the cross-border procurement blockages or planning issues. And last but not least, it's about using the regional cooperation mechanisms for the enlargement, using 3C's initiative elements, for instance, for helping the EU candidate states in the point of view of infrastructure, or on the point of view of building up common railroad deployment, for instance, across Ukraine and Moldova EU standard, might just be a way to unlock these countries from the heritage of the past and connect it better to the European core prior to the formal political accession. It is easier and much useful to connect the ports, to connect the people and the economies of both EU and candidate states than to wait for the long-term political enlargement of the EU. So if you can build up at the same standards, if you can come up, and the 3Cs, for instance, has this advantage of being composed of EU member states that we speak the same language from the point of view of the structure, of administrative issues, the acquis communautaire. And then if we discuss with non-EU partners, we can promote these standards to our partners and help them better prepare for the integration. And also, it's about never forgetting what I like to say about the role of Danube. If until so far we advocated the Black Sea, saying the Black Sea was a forgotten sea, Danube is a key role in that perspective. And we should no longer consider Danube as separated from the Black Sea, but rather as a key connector that goes from Central and Eastern Europe to the region. Danube and the Black Sea should be taught and think in the same way. And we can no longer speak distinctly about them. Danube is also one of the fastest way to connect the region and the Black Sea with the rest of Europe. And basically, these are, let's say, the main ideas for the moment. Yes.
Okay, sorry. Thank you.
For your patience.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it was great to zoom in on the Black Sea and Danube, and to zoom out to bring the USA and the Euro-Atlantic dimension. So
yes, because these are something that we discuss here, and connectivity is always linked here, especially with the US, and keeping them in, and not forget about other important actors like South Korea and Japan or India.
Yeah.
So
and maybe some others, and so that's why maybe I give the floor to Aris with our kind of discussion for today. So maybe to start for the Q&A. So time for me to check if there is any question in the box. So feel free to type in your question. But I guess Aris, you can start now.
Yes, thank you to all of you. We have many elements here, so I don't really know from where to start. However, we have a kind of elephant in the room. All of you spoke about the correlation between security and trade corridors. So any connectivity initiative is not only an economic or trade issue, it's a national security issue. We see that key countries of the IMEC, such as India, of course, or Israel, have at least complicated relations with Turkey. We see on the Three Seas initiative that most of the countries have good relations with Turkey, especially Poland, which is a pivotal country of the Three Seas initiative, has in general excellent relations with Turkey. Greece, which is both member of the IMEC and the Three Seas initiative, has also its own complicated relations with Turkey. So the question is, if we want to connect both networks, how do we manage this issue? Might sound a bit complicated as a question, but it's a real question. We have heard, for instance, Turkish president making very clear statements. I remember it was in 2023. He simply said, there is no IMEC without Turkey. So at least it's extremely clear, the mindset. So the question is, how is this issue seen in Israel, in India, or in Romania, for instance? So I don't, maybe Swasti, you can start if you want, since you were the first speaker.
Okay.
Please.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, so I think Turkey is an interesting part, and I've been noticing, and I don't have the time, obviously, to go into details of why we share a certain kind of an uncomfortable relationship with the country, which particularly comes from how, I mean, although India and Turkey do not have any geopolitical problem, India and Turkey historically have been quite, friendly and close, and the ties go back, I think, to the times of the Khilafat movement, actually, that has its roots in India. So, but without overstating too much of history, and let me come to the more present times, Turkey under Erdogan has taken a particularly kind of the leadership of the Islamic world and keeps rubbing it the wrong way on the question of Kashmir when it comes to India, which is obviously a non-negotiable for India. Now, however, I think from India's perspective, I have been noticing that the government has been trying to revisit and recalibrate its relationship with two difficult players without whom I think we obviously cannot really tackle the new geopolitical realities. One would be Turkey and the other is Azerbaijan. And with Turkey, I think when we finalized the FTA with Europe, which was this year in January, when Ursula von der Leyen and the entire group of commissioners from Europe had come to India. She was the chief guest of the Republic Day, etc. I think there was a lot of discussion, and I myself wrote a piece on it, and I said that India's mother of all deals with the EU has an uncomfortable cousin, and that's Turkey, because Turkey and the EU already have a customs union, and just because of signing the FTA, of course, India does not become sort of vulnerable to getting its market accessed by Turkish goods. That is not how it works. But what it means is the two things. One, that I think it is clear that Turkey is becoming more and more important for European strategic and economic security pursuits. And therefore, just as the terms of the customs union that Turkey has with the EU are likely to be upgraded, even though Turkey may not become a full-fledged EU member. I'm not even sure they want to. But even if that customs union arrangement is upgraded, I think eventually, willy-nilly, directly, indirectly, it will have a bearing on India. And also, India is mindful of the fact that India enjoys already a trade surplus with Turkey. And therefore, it definitely makes sense to have a compartmentalized, if I can say compartmentalization is not a very popular term in Indian foreign policy circles. It is what we usually tend to repeat again and again as multi-alignment. I think multi-alignment doesn't really capture what I wish to convey here. And I think compartmentalization is perhaps a better term, which is that there is incentive for Indian policymakers, to try and compartmentalize the problems with Pakistan versus, their encounter with Turkey, because that is only going to grow. So that is something that I think is obviously we all have taken notice of. And I think I welcome it, because we cannot wish Turkey away. I mean, Turkey is going to be there. That's one reason. The second reason why India will have to recalibrate its ties with Turkey is also because of the changing, dynamics of the Caucasus region. We have very deep ties with Armenia. India, Armenia, Iran had a trilateral. Our north-south connectivity corridor was going via Baku, but then we always wanted to connect it to our investments, in Iran, in Armenia. Now, with Armenia's tilt towards Europe and with the rise of Turkey and United States and that geopolitical calculus becoming more evident, it is only natural that India would also have to deal with the second order implications. So I think there is a lot of strategic logic as to why India should try and reset its ties with Turkey and trying to sort of keep the Kashmir question on the back burner. It does not make sense for India to sort of behave as if we can still deepen our ties with the Middle Eastern region and also the non-Emirati part of Middle East. I mean, please don't forget that while India certainly has Israel and UAE as the top most partners in the Middle East, but India has extremely legit and genuine interest with Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, and so on. So that multi-alignment is here to stay. And with the non-Emirati, the non-Israeli part of Middle East, India will still have to tackle, Turkey. Europe, India will have to tackle Turkey. In the Caucasus, India will have to tackle Turkey. So there is push for India to sort of reset, the ties there and try and sort of, like I said, compartmentalize, because I don't see any connectivity infrastructure project going ahead without the inclusion of Turkey and also Azerbaijan. So, and that's just to add to the other part that India lately has also been trying to sort of normalize and sort of recalibrate ties with Azerbaijan. We need gas. The Qatari gas is not coming. Azerbaijani gas is already the biggest supplier for Italy. The Americans are there for a particular reason. There is no reason why Azerbaijan shouldn't emerge as one of the key suppliers for India as well, just as we are also sort of trying to come out of the shock that weaponization of Hormuz has presented before us. So I think that is my bit on the part of Turkey and Azerbaijan.
Okay, thank you. Lauren, a comment on that?
So, in my view, IMEC should not be built on the assumption that the participating countries will be in a perfect harmony, as I mentioned in my lecture. I think that we need to think how without perfect harmony, we can do the connectivity projects around the world that and benefits the countries are involved in this invasion are benefit from them in the economy level, in the national strategic level, in the security level. Of course, we cannot ignore that Turkey is remain a really important actor. But having said that, as I mentioned, or I did not mention, I think the world is how the narrative, how the world going to be in a corridor, and it's not a zero gameplay. It's not only IMEC. It's not only Turkey, Syria, maybe Lebanon. I wish for them. I think it's all together. Okay, no, of course, not in one route, but I think that Omar's situation right now is emphasize this importance of the corridor, and we need to deal with Turkey and their ambitions, and we need to understand what exactly they want. Because for right now, we know that they want to be strongest and to be develop a security relationship with South Korea, Indonesia, etc., Pakistan, of course. So the disagreements are here to stay. Okay, we are not in the perfect world, unfortunately. Again, the question is whether a country sees enough strategic and economic value to continue cooperating despite these disagreements. Thank you.
Thanks, Lauren. I don't know, Mihai, if you have a comment on that, given especially the importance of Turkey for the connection with the Caucasus and Central Asia. So,
thank you. So, for Turkey, in a way, from the Romanian perspective and also from a personal perspective, Turkey is an actor we cannot avoid in the Black Sea. As I mentioned in my initial intervention, the Montreal Convention, for instance, is one key element that defines a navigation in the Black Sea. And last but not least, it's also about security issues, given our conflicts in the vicinity. So without Turkey support, security in the Black Sea would be difficult, almost impossible to organized just by Romania and Bulgaria by themselves. Also, we have a very strong economic relationship with Turkey, and also a strong cultural and political relationship that makes difficult or almost unimaginable the idea of skipping Turkey from the connectivity in the region. Also, Romania, and even recently in our official governing program, was often the EU member state that supported Turkey's accession to the EU. And it was said clearly written there that Romania will support Turkey EU bid if Turkey decides to advance further on that. So for us, Turkey joining EU is not at the theoretical level an impossibility, but it's something that has been expressed over and over in the last year. And from that perspective, we believe that, and some of the experts in Romania believe that Turkey may, even though it's a large and important actor, is not a disruptive actor in the region, especially if you look on the South Caucasus. We cannot see the security of the transportation there without the involvement of Turkey. And also, Turkey can play a key role as a land transport corridor for, let's say, the more northern parts of IMEC, from there going to Bulgaria, Romania, or across the Black Sea to Romania. So Turkey, it's an actor that should be involved in all these projects. And with a strong dialogue and negotiation, things can be enhanced and supported, because at the end of the day, we have common interests in the region about developing connectivity, economic prosperity, and so on. Even though there are frictions with maybe third-party actors between them and Turkey, they should not spill over also from in the wider Black Sea connectivity project. So having Turkey on board is something that is always been taken into consideration from the point of view of security, economy, connectivity, energy, and so on.
Thank you. Éric, do I have a bit time?
I don't know, because yeah, the idea is to keep it short for everybody, as we know that all of you are very busy. But if there is any key issue, topic, something we can maybe extend for 5 minutes if it's fine for you. But I don't want any frustration. But, any question, or maybe Aris, the last one, or Edward or Swasti, yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Sorry, I had a very quick question to Mihai, and because he just, I mean, I was like really listening very carefully to your involvement of Black Sea, Ukraine, etc. I myself, Mihai, had been making this argument for a long time that, in fact, Ukraine could be another strategic gateway for a country like India, because ultimately the reconstruction of Ukraine is going to develop into a mega global project, and particularly it makes sense for a country like India to join hands with European partners, trusted partners, either Brussels, France, Germany, Poland, whoever, to really sort of do something there, because this would be European standard but cheaper Indian labor. So it would be a win-win. However, as you know, that the Indian government as of now doesn't seem to be, really, I mean, having a strategy, to that region, basically just waiting and watching the war to play out. So I do not know as of now, if there is a government support to this idea, but I have myself made this idea, and I think there is a lot of strategic logic here. So I just wanted your your comments on how does it make sense to you that if from India that we talk about Ukraine as a strategic gateway, and I mean, I would just like to hear your feedback on that.
Well, bringing us other non-EU and non-neighboring countries in the reconstruction of Ukraine, I think on a personal note, it makes sense due to the huge human resources involvement. Already in the region, we have a strong deficit of labor force. And from that perspective, one of the ideas that came up also from one of the recent reports that we have done here about the EU and Asia is the fact that India, just like Bangladesh or other countries, can also contribute with human resources to the reconstruction process. Maybe not necessarily the same materials given the cost for transportation, but any reconstruction process at such scale will involve huge number of skilled workers, electricians, plumbers, construction workers, and they have to come from somewhere. Already, Romania, Bulgaria, other countries in the region import a high number of skilled workers. I mean, Romania just issued 90,000 work permits for abroad citizens to work in Romania in areas such as hospitality, construction, and so on. And these process requires, as I mentioned, this number. And India, for instance, from that perspective of human resources, and not only can also be a player in the region, if not by itself, then definitely I'm sure that companies in the region here in Central and Eastern Europe will also go eastwards toward the countries that already recruit workers to bring in even more for the process of reconstruction of Ukraine. So I believe this is a global project, not only regional, as correctly mentioned, that require the attention and coordination of many states from that perspective. In fact, not only the reconstruction of Ukraine, but also the development of the entire region. I mean, we still have a lot of highways to build, railways, electric connections, and so on, that can only advance the entire region and require a huge amount of intensive labor force and construction resources, and not only.
Thank you. And I have a last question, and then we finish that. It is just to switch back to the Middle East or West Asia for Lauren a question. We've been reading that there are at least it was announced by Saudi Arabia. I don't know if it's official or not, that it may prefer some parts of fiber optic cable and electricity cable to go through Syria rather than Israel and from there to Greece. Do you have heard something? Is it serious? Is it a way to check how to say, a reaction from Israel or anything like that?
So I'm embarrassed to say that it's the first time that I heard about that. That UAE want to get through to Syria cable.
Saudi Arabia, sorry.
Okay, yeah. Saudi Arabia right now, they are in a complex situation right now. They merge the engagement, the relationship with Pakistan. They need to think about the Suez Canal in France. So of course, maybe they consider about the Syria route, but on the paper, I can see why, in the theory, I can see why they want that. But, and again, I'm really optimistic and think that it's not a zero game. They can do it with Syria and Turkey, but they can do other things with the Israeli. It's important to say, right now, there is a goods that moving through Israel, through Saudi Arabia, Jordan. Okay, it's not going to be the first time that IMEC will bring something new to the table. IMEC will just increase the goods that will move on in this route. So I can understand why they want to do it, but I don't know if they will go on that, because I cannot see how stable Syria is right now. And for Saudi Arabia, it's very important, the stability in the region, I think.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Any very final point? No, it's okay. The end of the day here in Canberra, so time for me to go back home. But if you have anything else, feel free to share message, even personal message. You have the email of each other or WhatsApp number or whatever, or to find comments when the video will be online. I hope I didn't do any mistake, but I know Aris recorded the meeting as well, so we should be okay, hopefully. But no, thanks a lot again, because you took time to share all your work with us. That was a great privilege. So we see you, if it's fine for you, and if you're available, no obligation, on Thursday for some other thought about connectivity and conflict. Thanks, Aris. Thanks to all our dear speaker, and see you on Thursday. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Take
Have a good
care.
day.